good morning, and welcome to the first episode of The Artist Well in America. Um, Thank you so much, Alan, for having me on this program and for starting this. I'm really excited today to bring you to Brooklyn, where we'll talk with my friend Karen Marston. So, just a little bit about Karen. Karen Marston paints landscapes resonant with the vivid beauty of nature and the existential threat of global warming. Raised in California, she earned her BFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and participated in the AICA New York Studio Program. Her work has been seen in solo exhibitions in New York City, including 3 at Owen James Gallery, Fire Season in 2021, Harbingers in 2018, and Demeter's Wrath in 2016, as well as at Station Independent Projects and Storefront Bushwick, plus the recent solo show Relative to the Horizon 2022 at the James Baird Gallery in Canada. She has also participated in many group exhibitions in a variety of New York spaces, including Metaphor Projects, Front Room Gallery, and the Spring Break Art Show. She has been awarded multiple residencies at both the Pooch Cove Foundation in Newfoundland and the Gentile Artist Residency in Wyoming. Marston served as president of the Board of Trustees of Nurture Art nonprofit for over 10 years. She was instrumental in the growth of the organization, opening the Nurture Art Gallery and hosting 11 seasons of Muse Views, an informal monthly art salon with many notable guest speakers from the forefront of the New York art world. Marston currently lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. So welcome, Karen. How are you today?
Thank you for having me.
Well, I wanted to start by kind of sharing with everybody your story as an artist, kind of how you got to where you are today. So I was kind of curious about, you went to San Francisco Art Institute, right? Was there anything there that kind of really sparked something for you that led to your career today?
Well, everything. I mean, I went there as a 17-year-old straight out of high school, and it was a really open, free place, but a really serious place. There were no letter grades, there were no assignments. It was beginning painting, further painting, beginning drawing, further drawing. And the only difference between the two is they had a model for the beginners in case you didn't know what you wanted to work on.
Oh,
But
that's
other
so nice.
than that, it was the whole time very seriously focused on people finding themselves and figuring out what they needed to learn for what they wanted to express. And so that was like the thread that I think has carried me through my entire life of being trained not just how to paint, but why to paint, to think about
Yeah.
it. Not told why, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, to kind of follow that inquiry your whole life. Like
Mhm.
that's incredible. And then you were talking, let's see, from San Francisco, you came to New York. Was that kind of a direct transition, or did you travel anywhere along the way, or what got you to the city after that?
Well, I came to New York as a student. My last semester of school, I did that AICA studio program. It was a consortium of art schools from all over the country. There were like 2 of us from the Art Institute and a couple people from the Chicago Art Institute, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, the Kansas City Art, all over. And they plopped us in a dorm in Midtown. And rented a whole floor of a loft building in Tribeca. And so we got to play New York artists for a semester. And super fun. We had almost no, we had like a once a week seminar. And other than that, we went to, the East Village gallery scene was raging in
Mm.
the 80s. We went to lots of nightclubs. We went to lots of art openings in lots of nightclubs. Like Keith Haring at the Palladium and that kind of thing
Oh my
was
gosh, keep
was
hearing.
happening then. So New York was super exciting. I get back to San Francisco, graduate, and it seems like a sleepy village in comparison. And I was like, I think this is New York. I mean, graduated, waitressing job, got a studio, and was like, I got to go back to New York. So like the next year, I moved back to New York. And I lived on the Lower East Side before it was what it is today, when it was
Yeah.
still a very, very rough and tumble ghetto neighborhood with, there was ABC No Rio across the street from me on Rivington Street, which is this like amazing spoken word poetry place, but there were no art galleries yet. There was
Oh,
no, unless they did an occasional show that was way to come. That was, many years later. And then I moved to the south side of Williamsburg again, just at the beginning when artists were first starting to go there. And I showed at the very first galleries that opened there,
Oh
Right
my
Bank
gosh.
Gallery, Minor Injury, that were definitely like mostly artists started spaces and little neighborhood storefronts and stuff. And been in New York ever since. There was a sojourn of 2 years upstate,
Oh
long,
yeah.
long before the Hudson Valley, became what it is now. This is
Yeah,
like
that's the dream now.
you have to realize this is like pre-internet, so there was no like Zoom or email or anything to keep in touch or to bring you go up there and it was like, how do I make a living up here? And we thought it was going to be really cheap because real estate is cheaper, but
Yeah.
everything else is the same or more expensive. And you have all these different expenses, like you have to have a car and you have to pay for your own heat and stuff. So
Ooh.
it was actually a little rough, but it was my first time trying to paint from nature. The second year we were up there, started in Woodstock, in the little town of Woodstock, and then went a step further, another couple hours up into the Northwest Catskills, and lived in a disused farm in an old barn and painted the river and the animals, mostly dead animals that I came
Ooh.
across, because nature didn't it seemed like all my interactions with nature were like stumbling across a dead deer in the woods in the hills, or
Oh
a
my.
dead birds on the floor of the barn that looked like they were still flying but they were skeletal with their wings. Things like that were an influence.
Wow. Like a
So
confrontation with kind of the death side of nature, not everything kind of pretty and pastoral, but real life and survival.
also picked the worst winter they'd had in 20 years for this experiment in country living.
Oh God.
Massive blizzard, all the roads closed, like really pretty isolated. And in spring, when the snow melted, the Delaware River, which was right across the street, overflowed its banks and there were trees trapped in the water. It was a really eerie, beautiful landscape. And I didn't know what I was going to quite do with it, but I took a lot of photographs of it and sketched it. And I feel like it was like germinating seeds of my interest much later in disasters.
Wow.
The
Trees
first place,
underwater and things.
yeah, the trees underwater, and they came into my work several times over the years. I always say to people that I think artistic development is not a straight line; it's a spiral, and things come around a little differently, a little
I love
differently, a
that.
little differently each time you reapproach them, and so that image of trees in the water did come back around later on.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I love that. That's amazing. And then so then after that you came back to New York City and then
Came
where did you
back
go
to
then?
New York City and found in the meantime my ex and I had been priced out of Williamsburg because
Oh
we
my
were one of
gosh,
the
no.
first artists, we were in the first round of artists and, pioneers in Williamsburg when cab drivers didn't want to take you there because they thought it was too dangerous. And then I came back, and while I was gone for 2 years upstate, New York Magazine had put Williamsburg on the cover. It's the next neighborhood. It was like,
It's
thanks,
doomed.
ruined it. Then it was like development, development, development. And there were no lofts left that were affordable. So I lived in Park Slope in like a floor through apartment, railroad apartment that a lot of people thought, oh, you got such a big apartment. I was like, you kidding? We just left a 3,000 square foot carriage house on 13 acres in the country. Of course, there were reasons that it was cold, it was expensive, it was whatever. But yeah, so I spent 2 years in Park Slope and eventually worked my way back to Williamsburg, got in a position I had a little nest egg and was able to buy the building that I'm in now before the window entirely closed in the real estate market.
Well
Um,
done.
yeah, I'll try not to make this conversation all about real estate. This happens all the time in New York. For those of you who don't live there, people get two artists in a room talking, and instead of talking about art, they start talking about real estate.
Yeah.
Uh, but
But
where was I going with that? What was the original question?
Right. Well, but there's something interesting about that, like your kind of desire to build spaces, like even with the barn and to where you are now. Like you've been in this building and you really made it your own. Like I've visited you there and the floor and just kind of the care and attention you put to creating these worlds that you're creating your work in is just really interesting as an artist as well.
I I've always painted big and I need space. And I was never really more miserable than when I was trying to paint in the teeny little room in the railroad apartment. I tried to paint big in this like 10-foot square room. And I even resorted to like looking through the back end of a pair of binoculars to see what it looked like from far away. I mean, it was just crazy.
The
I
back
just,
end, I love that.
yeah, stupid. Don't do it. Um, so I don't know. It's just having a space, and yeah, it is like something about making a space your own and building it out and creating the environment where the work happens is all, part of it. If
Yeah,
you can see,
well,
I painted the floor in here, the table, like you name it.
yeah, that's
It's all
incredible. The care in it. Well, we'll get to the studio visit in a minute, but before we do, I wanted to kind of touch on your experience creating nurture art and with Muse Fuse. Like you created that space for artists to kind of get to know more about behind the scenes from gallerists. And is that right? Like, what was Muse Fuse like
yeah.
for you?
I mean, it was similar to this, only in person, only except for artists speaking each time. I was having gallerists, curators, writers, various people in the art world that artists are curious about, but might not necessarily always have easy access to. And so they would come, and it was in my studio. This friend of mine called me up. So it was this tiny little organization called Nurture Art that I stumbled on the internet, and in the earliest days, and went to a couple of these things. And the woman who created it and hosted it was a photographer who lived on the Upper East Side in an apartment that was spotless. You like everyone sat on the floor. You could have eaten off that floor. And it was a really nice, just like hangout. Like people were just there till midnight drinking, the beer her boyfriend made in the bathtub kind of thing. Um, and so a couple of years later, the next person who hosted it couldn't do it anymore because his wife was having a baby. And he calls me up and he's like, "Do you want to host this thing?" And I'm like, "Oh, me? Who? I'm nobody. Who would, because the other people who hosted it, like, were more out there showing their work and stuff. They were more role models. And like, I don't know, who, what? And they're like, "Oh, you'd be good at it. You're good at organizing." I'm like, "What?"
Yes.
I had organized a couple shows, but that was it. I didn't have any, administrative organizational experience. But I don't know. So I begged off and I said, "Well, I don't have anywhere, my studio is big, but it's cold, it's not heated, and it has a cement floor. It's really dirty. Where would everyone sit?" Because it's the other places, there were nice places to sit. So a week later, he called me back and he says, "I found 20 chairs in a dumpster in front of my studio. I'm bringing them to your house." So then I couldn't say no.
Only
I
New
had
York.
the chairs. And I discovered that I could invite people to speak, and people that like I would be too shy to go up to and say, like, as an artist, like, "Oh, would you look at my work?" or something. If I said, "I represent this organization and we would like to have you come speak at our, and they'd be like, "Oh, really? Wow, gosh, thanks." And they'd be flattered and they'd say yes. Like no one said no to me. Almost.
Wow. I'm not
And that was
surprised.
before we even had budget for a speaker stipend. No one said no. I mean, there was a guy, and everybody brought food, and it was very
Hmm.
beer, hung out, and it had this informal, like you're just hanging out with your friends in your studio late at night talking kind of vibe. And I think that people who were a little fancier in the art world felt comfortable because it was like not an institutional environment. It wasn't a gallery. It wasn't a school. It wasn't a museum. It was just somebody's studio. And the artist felt comfortable. It was like, we're on our own turf, And so
Yeah.
just like hanging out, and they would answer questions. And it was a really warm audience. They didn't ask questions to like gotcha questions. They had genuine curiosity and warmth and interest, and it just had a great vibe. It was like, that I couldn't believe how many people would just do it for free. But people brought all this food. And one time I had this writer, Brian Scholas from Art Forum speak. And at the end of the night, I was trying to, there was too much food, like leftover snacks, and there was an unopened box of Entenmann's chocolate chip cookies. And I'm like, would you take these? And his face just lit up. And you have to know what he looks like, because he looks like Harry Potter, only 6 feet tall. Like he was in his 20s or 30s, I think, but he looked like he was like
Yeah.
12. Adorable. And he's like, oh, cookies. And I felt like I should give him a glass of milk to go with him. He's like, this is great. I have a deadline tonight. I need some. This is better than a stipend. He was so excited. Like, I
Better
had
than a
like
stipend.
people talking for cookies, But it was just super fun. It was super fun. That was the best part of Nurture Art. I joked that it was a hobby that got out of hand. I ended up running the whole organization, and we opened a gallery, and it ate my life. It became a $350,000 a year budget with 4 employees, and a huge thing.
Wow. Yeah, it
Um,
did.
but we couldn't keep it kind of we basically, when we first opened our first gallery, everybody was really afraid to sign the lease and get the space. And I said, listen, what's the worst thing that could happen? We run out of money, we'll close it. We'll just do shows as long as we can.
Yeah.
Run out of money, we'll close. So we did shows for 17 years, and then we ran out of money.
Wow. That's a long run though. And it's made such an impact. So many artists I know showed there.
It was a good run. Yeah, so, and that was a really nice intro to a community. And we never showed, none of us board members, it was all artists, and we never showed our own work unless we were donating it like to the annual benefit. And even that we stopped doing after a while and started just buying tickets so that other people could be in the show. But indirectly, I met so many people that helped me and got so much more comfortable with networking and the way the art world works. And it was just super helpful in a million ways, aside from like this general supportive feeling of being part of a community. I met a lot of people that this led to this, led to this, led to this show, or to this relationship that led to this, that led to this. And so that's how I eventually started finally really showing.
That's beautiful. I love that sense that all came from your community that you created. Like the cookie story is just delightful. Seeing someone from art form like light up like that, that's incredible. Well, I wanted to get we can continue talking during the presentation, but I wanted to share your amazing space so people can see your studio that you built. All right, let me share. We took a video of this, and
Yeah, I was worried about my like wandering around with the camera. It's a little blown out.
No, it'll be just fine.
The Wi-Fi is a little all the way back there is not.
I love the skylights there.
Oof. The previous owner of the building had painted over them with roofing tar, and so finding people willing to like work on them and like scrape them just enough to get the planes of glass out and put new glass in was like, but I love the feeling of the space, and you'll see what these paintings really look like when we get to the images, because wow, this picture quality.
Yeah, this looks a little blown out, but we'll get there. But if this really shows their scale, like these are massive. When you're in front of them, you really can feel like you're in this expanse, like you're caught up in it. So yeah, and let's see, you've got flat files there, and oh, there's the smaller works from Gentel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what medium do you use for these?
I've always mostly painted in oil. Just recently, yeah, I thought it might be fun to see the storage, which I'm running out of.
Yes.
A little Gentel Wyoming souvenirs.
Absolutely. Yeah. Karen and I, along with several people here, Frank and Amy, we were all at Gentel Artist Residency this fall together, and these are some of our souvenirs.
But yeah, I've always been an oil painter, and just the last couple of years doing these residencies, I finally broke down. The first time I brought the oil paint, and it was a little hard to deal with when at the end, you want to roll stuff up and take it home and want it not to have to worry about them being wet. And I was like, oh, I was always kind of a snob of oil paint, but acrylic has improved a lot in the last few decades. And I tried these golden open acrylics that have the dryer built in, and they've worked out all the chemistry, so it's just the right amount. You don't have to like be pouring it on and hoping you're putting enough or too much or whatever. And
Mhm.
it's because before I was trying oil with a little dryer in it, with a little bit of alkyd dryer, and this is sort of like meeting in the middle somewhere, so that it almost feels like just oil paint that's drying slightly faster than normal,
Yeah.
but then dry the next day. So anyway, it's just for practical purposes. So now I have like 2 palettes, and I have like a whole bunch of acrylic paint that I take with me on residency, and then when I get home, I paint in oil.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Mhm.
Do you work in oil and acrylic on the same surface or do you switch? Let me see if we can get to yes, do you do like combine them maybe or do you do them keep them separate like
Um,
this piece in oil, this is one in acrylic?
Not only if I only on the occasions that's happened like twice now, that one there,
Yeah.
um, that I brought home from Wyoming, the half finished and dissatisfied with. And so it was started with acrylic, but now I'm working on it in oil. And that happened one other time. There was a small painting that I brought home with me from Newfoundland last summer that got damaged in transport, and I was going to throw it out, and a friend of mine came over and she said, "What are you, crazy? What's wrong with you? It's not that bad. Fix it. You're not, just paint over it and fix it." Like, oh, maybe, okay. And then I mean, of course, because it turned into completely repainting it. You can
Yeah.
see it. It's there. Those two, the
Oh, those
small
two.
one, those on the right. So
Let me
the
see. Oh,
first thing I did was like, oh,
it's right
oh
here.
well, this painting I loved is a disaster because it was destroyed. I'll repaint this image because I really loved it. And I did a bigger oil version of it. And then this friend of mine was like, "What? Don't throw this away. You should try painting on it." So at that point, I kind of had
It's a good
nothing to lose.
friend.
Like I'd already done a new version of it that I was feeling good about. And I thought, well, yeah, I guess, I couldn't quite bring myself to like totally destroy it. So I did go back into it. And it was an interesting exercise. I've never done the exact same image twice like that.
Wow.
Um, and to go back to it and repaint it afterwards, it was all like all things I thought weren't good things to do that turned out to be good things to do.
I love that.
Studio
Well,
challenge was a nice studio challenge.
that's a good prompt. Yeah. Well, okay, let's switch over to the slides now and we can talk more about the images in the studio that we're seeing. So I'll stop share here and share, okay, the screen. See if that works then. All right.
Oh,
So
this is super ancient history here. Colleen asked me
great.
to like go way back. So this is like the 1990s. The deer on the left is from when I lived upstate, is the dead deer that I found in the woods. And I painted it a number of times as it gradually decayed and turned into a skeleton. Um, and then I did a series of birds. It started out with the birds that I found in the barn that were like the skeletons with the wings. And then I got so interested in birds that I went sort of looking for bird reference material. I was really interested in the Maybridge, um, photos of the moving animals and stuff. So I did the bird. And then there was a whole series about hearts and lungs.
Ooh.
And um, I combined them. I started off, it all started with the idea of the tree in the water that I saw,
Oh,
that I told you about in the Delaware
yeah.
River.
Oh, wow.
The idea of the tree being somewhere it's not supposed to be, but having these roots and having to breathe. And I went through kind of difficult time in my life, and I started doing yoga, and I was thinking a lot about breathing. And I thought about this tree in the water, and I put the lungs in the water as they were the tree branches or the roots trying to breathe underwater. And then it turned into having them be part of the tree in the sense of a nest and the heart. It was like a visual, one thing led to another kind of organically. And so there was a
Good.
whole series of trees and of hearts and lungs that were either underwater or entwined where the veins became branches of a tree or a nest. I like this
Ooh.
idea of the heart held in a nest, like it's like growing its own um, home, its own safe, little environment.
Yeah, you feel that kind of nestling going on, and the water, like I get that effect so much. The idea of breathing lungs underwater is just haunting. Like, ooh, is the water breathing, or it's really intense for that. Wow. And those were from the same period, or that was after?
That was the animals came first, and then the hearts and lungs.
Oh, okay. And then next we have, oh,
And
there we are.
I'm not sure. Oh, this is even before all of that. This
Oh,
is
okay.
like late 80s. This is when I first moved to Williamsburg. I lived essentially under the Williamsburg Bridge. It was across the street from me. I was on South 6th and Berry, and the bridge went by overhead. And in those days, there was an open, accessible, empty lot underneath the bridge looking up. So and then it doesn't look like this anymore because they totally redid the underneath, and it's more modern and cement, and they walled all this off.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was really interested in this sort of like skeletal form of it, the structure of it, space.
Yeah, it's kind of dark and ominous and unknown. And
They're
then,
all different
yeah.
sizes. I mean, this is kind of equalizing the size thing, but yeah, anyway.
Oh, they're different sizes. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. Same here. So this is like same time period when I was living in Williamsburg before I went upstate. And this is during the first Kuwait War, when they set the oil fields on fire. And at the time, I didn't have a television set. I was just listening to the description on the radio, and I was so kind of disturbed by it. I felt like I kind of had to paint it. And so a lot of it's like from imagination. And then as I worked on the series, I started like hunting down actual pictures to see what it really looked like. And I just did a handful of these and kind of didn't know where to go with it and put them away. Like the one on the right is really big. I think that's
Mhm.
at least 7 feet tall. Um, That's the biggest
Wow,
one. I think the one in the middle is like 4 by 5, maybe. And the other
that's
one
massive,
is,
yeah.
I think, 24 by 36
So that's the
ish.
smallest one.
That's the smallest one. Um,
But that curve of fire, like sweeping you in the middle, like that, you can feel this motion and this explosion, almost hear it, like feels very ominous.
yeah, kind of like a fire. So without knowing it, this was the beginning of my environmental disaster interest.
Wow.
Very much
Wow.
about war, and yeah, I didn't, you know, but it's weird. It's like I did a bunch of them, and then it stopped. Then I put them away. I didn't think about it for 20 years. And then I don't know where are we jumping to next, I guess.
Oh yeah, next, let's see. We've got this series. So when was this one? Did it show?
um, oh yeah, this happened in between.
Ah.
This was this is actually before all those hearts and lungs.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
just slightly out of order, but that's totally okay. It's all based on The Wizard of Oz. This is probably the tightest, most narrative, most figurative type of work I've ever done. Um, it came out of I went on a trip to Vietnam and saw a lot of interesting things that I couldn't understand. It was like when it first opened up to Western travel, and they hadn't kind of got down the idea of being tour guides. So they would take you places and you wouldn't know what you were looking at. Like, that monkey a pet? Is it dinner? Is it a watchdog? I don't know.
I
What's
don't know.
here, you know? And so when I came back, at first I did like some beautiful large landscapes of just of imagery, and then it started to morph into this idea, because one of the things we saw there was a temple of a sect that was really powerful before the war,
Mm.
that was started by this guy in the 1920s who was really interested in seances. He was talking to Victor Hugo and so on. And
Oh,
it was
wow.
that time, I guess, that interest in all that stuff was everywhere in the world. And he had created this religion. And in the temple, I should have given you to go with the story. There's one that fits this better, but there's this giant paper mache sphere with an eye in the middle of it, and like dragons and birds flying around, and it's really comfortable, and I was just like, I feel like I'm in the Wizard of Oz, in that when they go to see the wizard in the temple, and there's the giant face in the, what I'm talking, the
Yeah.
scene at the end of the movie. And when I saw, read about the timing, when I got home, I was like, when was The Wizard of Oz written? And it was written in 1900, and it was such a huge hit. It was translated into 24 languages. And the guy that invented this religion was a civil servant who spoke many languages. And he was really interested in a lot of, like Western literature and, the whole connection to France and Victor, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. And so I have no proof of this, but it's my private theory that he was influenced by the Wizard of Oz, that there's no way that this man invented this religion and built this temple without having read the Wizard of Oz, because it just
Yeah.
feels so much like it.
That's
And so
incredible.
then that became like this framework for all of a lot of things, like personal experiences, like the monkeys that I saw in Vietnam grew wings and became the winged monkeys. And
Yeah, I
it
love
took
that
off
blue.
from there in its own direction. But like, that's, the dog I had at the time asleep under the poppy. And uh,
Oh,
for the scarecrow, I read all the books in the book. It's all this interesting backstory. But one that I loved was that the scarecrow is being made by the farmer. And when he paints his eye on, he becomes sentient and he watches himself be created.
mm,
And I love that idea as an artist of the act of seeing being what defines you as being alive. And
oh,
so I
wow. The active sight.
put the scarecrow's head in just with its first eye painted on, instead of in a farm workshop on my, and put it on an artist's table with my stuff.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, I can see
and
the
it was
gamble
fun.
in there.
It was really fun. So they were all like that. And I did this, whole series of those. And then the tree that was in the water from the Delaware River
Oh,
became
very good.
where the witch was melted, because so that instead of just a puddle, it was a flood. And it was this beautiful, I loved upstate when you are aware of when everything turns blue at twilight. So the whole thing is like you can't even differentiate the horizon line. It's like a cobalt blue and just this pool of black that's almost like an oil slick, like
Mm.
and she's melted into the water, into this endless water. And then there's the tree
Ooh,
in the water in the background.
dark. Yeah, that's gorgeous. I
So
love how
that's
the
like,
echoes.
so there's all these like connections like that where imagery just repeats, and
Yeah.
then that tree in the water became the lungs in the water. And that led to the next series with the lungs and the heart. And the heart probably came from, it's hard to see in this one, but in the top row in the middle, the one with the Tin Woodman,
Oh, there it is.
his heart is on the floor, on the ground
Oh,
um, by the tree,
yeah. Wow.
his
So that all
missing
weaves
heart.
together. Oh,
Yeah.
it's right there. The reds in these are just spectacular. Just these lush fields and the lion, like they're really haunting and beautiful and unknown. Like it's something familiar, but I don't quite recognize it in this content. I love that. And the personal stories on it. So let's go next to disasters.
So here we are 20 years later from the first oil fires, and there's the BP oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and it catches on fire, and there's these massive columns of black smoke. And I'm like, oh my God, again? This is this thing again? And at the same time, there was a volcano that erupted in Iceland that was so huge, like it disrupted air travel and all over Europe for weeks. And I was sort of really interested in this black column of smoke, white column of smoke, man-made disaster, natural disaster. And I wanted to juxtapose them, and I wanted to revisit this oil fire, I think. And I didn't know what was going to happen, but it led to years of every time I opened the newspaper, there was more inspiration about climate disaster and climate change influenced disasters. Like this idea of like, I was interested in which one of these is the man-made, and which, what things are man-made and what things are natural, and aren't we part of nature anyway? But how we're sort of like, the sorcerer's apprentice, that our technology has gotten out of hand, and is gotten beyond our control, and is affecting the environment and making everything. At that time was like, these are the biggest tornadoes we've ever had. These are the biggest hurricanes we've ever had. Every was a record breaker. And so this led to all of the next many years of work. I'm sure you have more examples in there. If you want to go
we'll go to the next. Oh, yeah. And well, we can briefly touch on these and continue.
But at the same time, right around the same time, I also started painting plein air landscapes. These are tiny, like the one on the left is 8 inches by 8 inches. The one on the right is maybe 12 by 14 or something. And I just did it for fun in the summer as like an escape sort of thing. And they became studies, like you learn how to paint a cloud outside. Then I would go back to the studio to paint, billowing smoke from some fire. And it was really, so
keep that energy.
I kind of like that. Somebody came to my studio and said, your landscapes are kind of scary in a way. Like these, there's things going on in the shadows in the woods here. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
The shadows again.
Or the clouds or whatever. And the opposite, the disasters have like kind of a seductive beauty to them. So I feel
they do.
They're both doing both in the way that natural disasters and the man-made disasters are both doing both too,
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And then here's the tornadoes.
So those are the tornadoes.
How big are these?
Those they're a weird size. I think they're 34 by 37 or something, or 37 by 34. They're slightly rectangular. Somebody gave me, a friend who was moving out of their studio, is like, had a bunch of stretcher bars that, it was like somebody who made stretcher bars, and they were ordered and not in an odd size, and no one. So I did this series. I did like 4 of them. I got like 4 of them, and I was like, oh, these are great. And the gallerist came and she's like, oh, would you do more of them? I'm like, that's all they gave me. It's like odd size. I just had these 4. She's like, you could get more that size if you like them. I'm like, oh yeah, true. So I got some more. So there's more than 4 in the series because it's the size kind of work. Like, even though they're giant, it's like a giant. I like the idea that they have a lot of power compacted into a relatively small canvas.
Yeah, like a tornado. And then next we have the waves.
Hurricanes. This was the first one in the series of hurricane waves. This was Hurricane Sandy.
And then here's another one too.
I think there's another one. This is called Massive Waves, and it's 5 by 7 feet.
Oof. I would not want this coming at me right now. Like it's incredibly ominous and powerful. All those dark shadows again. And then
it's like something that's normally, the beautiful ocean surf turned into something terrifying.
Mm, yeah.
And
Yeah.
this has like a companion piece that's the same size, that was a forest fire. Is the other of all of the themes of all the disasters I've done, the forest fire is the recurring one that keeps
Ooh,
coming back. But so at the time that I did this wave, I also did, I think it should be the next slide.
yeah, let's go there. Yeah.
This is the same size. This is actually
It's
behind me on the wall.
it's right there.
It's 5 by 7 feet, forest fire.
Oh,
I grew up
so,
in California, and so when California is on fire, that's like, I don't live there anymore. It's
mm,
like, oh my God.
yeah,
Uh,
it's your home. And then, yeah, here's a couple more from that series.
those are 3 by 4 feet. Those are 36 by or 48 by 36. That's an
Wow.
installation shot for my first show at the Owen James Gallery.
Oh, wow. And just the way that smoke plume is really rising and just the vastness of that space, like above those tall trees, and that thick yellow smoke, like I can feel it, like almost like thickening. Wow. Yeah, that's devastating. And then, oh, here's the iceberg.
So then the next thing I got interested in was the melting of the Arctic and this idea that, and it was like the challenge of it was that it's not as dramatic as a fire exploding, that it's a slow dissolve, and that you kind of have to understand, know that to know that what you're looking at is something scary that's, representing something not, you know. So I wanted to
Mhm.
see icebergs in person. I mean, I would
Yeah?
like to see these things in person, but obviously, like, you can't set up an easel in front of a forest fire or a tornado. But
Nope,
um,
not the best thing.
but I thought I could see an iceberg potentially. And I started trying to figure out where the nearest, most accessible icebergs were. And in Newfoundland, which is not that far from New York, there are
Mm.
icebergs because they break off of Greenland, float across the Atlantic, and then drift down the Canadian coast in the spring. And they get icebergs there. So I got on a plane and went to Newfoundland
Oh my
in
gosh.
May and drove around looking at icebergs. And so this is stuff that I actually saw, and it was and it was weird because you usually see pictures of icebergs in the Arctic or in Antarctica or somewhere where they're surrounded by snow, and
Yeah, yeah,
in
that's what
the
you think.
Arctic. And what's weird about seeing them in Newfoundland is they're sort of very forlorn looking. It's kind of the perfect symbol, even though it's the normal thing to happen there. There's just more of it than there ever was before. But they're the giant icebergs. They break off from Greenland, but they're at the end of their
More.
lifespan, they're melting, they're dissolving. And so
Mm,
seeing them against not a snowy necessarily background, as you can see here. And so it turned out to unintentionally, I thought, be the perfect metaphor for the Arctic melting, because you're seeing, it feels like you're looking, it's like, is this the last iceberg ever? It's not,
oh,
but it's, because they're shrinking and breaking and stuff, it had like a certain poignancy that it
yeah.
um, might not have. I mean, someday I'd like to go to Greenland and see the other
Oh,
side
yes.
of it, where they come from. But I really enjoyed doing this, and definitely am influenced by a church. And
Yeah.
his amazing Arctic painting was also researched in Newfoundland. And I read his book.
Oh.
He wrote a book. He didn't write a book. His friend wrote a book. He brought a friend who was a writer with him, and they went on this boat trip to see the ice, for him to research icebergs for his painting. And
Mhm.
so, being pre-Instagram, his friend wrote a book about their travels to promote his project. And it was like amazing to read it. And it was like, I went to a lot of the places they went, 100
Oh
years
my
later.
gosh.
I was like, oh, okay.
Wow. You're doing your own exploring there. That's amazing that you actually saw
Yeah.
these. And there, just see it like in the middle of this vast expanse, kind of this lone figure. going off to melt. Like it's very poignant. We're running a little low on time, but I want to make sure we can get through several series we have left. This one
Yeah, so
was the
we
coil, right?
can just sort of bang through. You kind of got the idea of, what I'm thinking about. So the next thing I did was the bleaching coral, the endangered coral reefs, uh,
Hmm.
which
Yeah,
these are from.
very ghostly. And then here's fires again. Ooh,
And then fires returned in 2020, was a big fire year. Australia was on fire,
yeah.
California was on fire, the world felt on fire. It was the
Mm.
pandemic starting, everything that was just happening in the world in 2020. Um, and so
Yeah.
this is what I did during lockdown is I painted fires. This is a little bit weird in the slide because of the scale. These
Mm.
paintings are actually both the same size.
Hmm.
They're 20 by 26 inches. They're on UPO paper. I just got a big stack of that
UFO.
paper um, before lockdown, and that's what I did for the year. And I started, was painting them fast, and I love this slick paper surface, how it allows the paint to just skate around. I can like wipe it out and get beautiful um, paper showing like it's almost like monotype, but not
Yeah.
kind of a look to it.
And is that
Um,
what the white is that we're seeing? Is that the light coming
oh
through the
yeah,
paper?
yeah. So
Gorgeous.
the whites in it are primarily the paper where I'm like wiping out. And so it just gives it this
Oh, I love
glow
that.
that's really conducive to fire.
Yeah. And this is seductively beautiful for what it is too. I really get that with that light. Okay, and the next one we have Wyoming.
Yeah. Um, so I got this residency at Gentel in 2021 where Colleen and I got to know each
Yay.
other. Um, and Colleen and I were out hiking in the hills of the Thousand Acres, and we saw the most incredible thunderstorm come in.
Mhm.
It was so dramatic. I just had to paint it really big. I brought a roll of paper with me and I just like did it as big as I could fit on the wall there. This is 12 feet wide.
12
Um,
feet.
and I just had a blast doing it. And this was sort of a corner turning of like my landscapes before this were plein air and were little on an easel. And they were kind of like the summer sideline, almost like journal keeping, like a supportive secondary project. And when I did this, it was like they got center stage. This is
Yeah.
when and when the idea of the power of nature became for me like it doesn't have to necessarily be a tornado or a fire. Just nature is that powerful on a regular day, on a regular thunder.
Wow.
Have
Yes.
that feeling. So
So dramatic. Oh, I love the scale of this one in person too. Like you were surrounded and it really you captured it just seeing that day and your impression of it. I'm just blown away. Yeah, and here's a couple more from those times. And this other one was about the same size as the first one, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the hills.
Just like the endless rows of hills was so interesting. I said to somebody there, it reminds me of the ocean. 'Cause I grew up in Southern
Oh, I love
California
that.
near the ocean. And yeah, it was Mary Jane Edwards, the executive director of Gentel, who knew the area really well. And she said, well, it it was ocean at one time in prehistory. And so
Oops.
it just made it make a whole different kind of sense to me. So then the next year I went to Newfoundland and I was actually at the ocean. And so like I see a relationship. And it's also a very dramatic place where it just feels like
Oh,
you're at the end of the world. At first when I got invited there, I was like, well, it's not iceberg season.
yeah.
What am I gonna paint there? But when I got there, it was like, again, just what it a regular day there is plenty dramatic. In the summer, these are small, like 20 back to the 20 by 26 on UPO, and the other
Mm.
one's a big 12 footer. But I just love the cliffs and the ocean. And you really feel like there's a plaque somewhere on one cliff that says this is the most northeastern point of North America. And it feels like it. It just feels like you're at the edge of the world. It just like there's a drama there to the ocean and to the sky. It's somehow similar to Wyoming, this kind of really big sky and really big expanse that I guess I
Yeah,
really speaks to me.
that's so vast. Gosh, these are
This
all
is
incredible, and I'm going fast, but
the fog. Yeah. I arrived at this place, this tip of this peninsula, and it was like, oh, everything I thought I wanted to paint that I could that day was like, it was fogged in. So I was making the best of it and got back to the studio and was like, well, guess I'm painting fog. But it worked.
yes,
It
yeah,
got to be one of my favorite ones.
I
Just a
love
weird
that.
way. I love how things are like the rock formations emerging out of the fog, which was something I painted from Vietnam many years ago. I saw that Halong Bay on a foggy day, also with the rocks. Is something I should have.
Mm.
Next time, I should start thinking more about all the relation, all the exact. There's some really interesting one-to-one relationships over many years, but there
I
were
love
rock
that.
formations in the fog from that too. So.
Wow. And then we'll get to the final one. This is back at Gentel, or these two. Yeah.
Yeah, so we got to go to Gentel again
Yes.
just last month,
Yeah.
and I took a side trip to the Badlands with a couple of people beforehand. We kind of added on to our trip, rented a car, and drove to see the Badlands. So that's where this one was from, which are it's just incredible, incredible place, like another planet. It's just
And this one was in your studio, so we saw the scale of that on the wall.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
Um,
oh,
And then that last slide is all I did. I had a bunch of small sheets of Yupo, 11 by 14s, and I just like kind of whipped through these I didn't actually paint them outdoors because a lot of the most interesting places to paint, you have to hike a bit to get to. And, putting all the gear on my back was not going to happen. I was lucky if I could
mm,
walk that
those were
far up.
really high hikes. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I would do is sketch in a sketchbook outside using those watercolor crayons and take a lot of pictures with my phone, and then come back to the studio and pick usually something I sketched and had backup photographs of and work from that, which is how I do my big ones too, but so I just I like the spontaneity of these small pieces.
Yeah. And the drips, like, yeah, these are gorgeous. All these different moments. All right, so I'm gonna go back now. Let's stop sharing. Since we're low on time, we've got about 5 minutes left. Sorry, everyone. And then we'll check the Q&A. All right. Oh, Owen McLaughlin says, great interview. Sorry I had to go early. And yeah, let's see. Let's open it up now and see if anyone has any questions that we'd like to ask. All right, ask all to unmute. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and ask them or text them in the chat, and then just go ahead and mute yourself afterward.
Listen, well done, firstly. That was fantastic. And Karen, your work is just fabulous.
Oh,
It's
thank you.
awesome. The one thing that I'm particularly interested in is you mentioned this UPO paper.
Mhm.
Just on a practical note, when you do paint on that, how do you frame it? Because I presume it's paper, in which case it's quite flimsy.
Yeah, it is. It's stronger than you would think because it's called paper, but it's no trees are harmed in the making of it. It's a man-made product. Not lost on me the irony that it's a petroleum product because it's like plastic melded together.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
and so I mean, I hope the paint will stick to it long term. Nobody knows about the archivalness of it. I mean, I think the paper itself will outlast a nuclear holocaust, but if the oil paint will still be stuck to it, I don't know. But
Yeah.
I have shown it a lot of different ways. I am totally fine with just pinning it to the wall. And I've done that for several exhibitions, especially the giant ones. I mean, it's, I sold that big one, and the person who bought it said, what should I do with it? And I said, just staple it to your wall. It'll be fine. And she,
But is it difficult to frame then?
but it could be framed. I mean, when I had the show at Owen James in 21 of all of those fire paintings that were on UPO small, we framed them all. And they look nice framed too.
Okay. Yeah. No, it just seems a very interesting bit of material to use.
Yeah, I never thought about liking smooth surface before, but I've been trying to figure out how to recreate the surface on canvas, like with either oil ground. I've tried different house paints and enamels and stuff, trying to like come up with that smooth, because it really changed the way I paint and made me much more spontaneous, and the paint handling is really responding to that.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. That's all from me.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, Karen, do you have anything coming up next? Shows or opportunities that you want to share?
I'm going back to Newfoundland again in the spring. I'm going to spend 2 months there in April and May. And so I have my fingers crossed for seeing icebergs, because that's iceberg season up there.
Oh, wow.
And I'm having a solo show at the James Baird Gallery up there in Newfoundland that opens May 31st. So hopefully I'll have a residency to fill that gallery.
That'll be wonderful.
Any last questions? Last chance. At me. Run at me.
I'm going to UCross at the end of March, so I'm really looking forward to Wyoming.
Oh, that'll be great. UCross is really, it's same environment. It's just over the hill from Gentile. You'll love it.
Irene O'Neill says, great talk. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Irene, for being here. Carol, what was that?
You should do a residency in Ireland. One of your paintings, I can't remember which one, your work is incredible. Absolutely unbelievable. I think that frames would be too restricting on such energy that bursts forth from them. Yeah, there's a lovely residency down in the Byrne College of Art in County Clare. And one of your paintings actually looks like the Cliffs of Moher.
When I was in Newfoundland and posting pictures to Instagram, people kept saying, "Are you in Ireland? Are you in Western Ireland?" And I was like, "No." But I think, again, like history of geology, I think Newfoundland broke off of Ireland in millions of years ago, and that's why they have those cliffs. And they probably fit together like puzzle pieces.
I was interested to hear you talking about oils and acrylics. Probably a silly question. Have you tried the water-based oils?
I haven't. I don't understand what those are. Do you use them?
How
water into them?
Yeah, water into them. I use them when I'm away, because I don't want to disturb, just working with oils and all the mixing and stuff like that, and the spirits and things. But yeah, no, they're interesting. But you work quite big. You work huge. They're amazing.
Well, not always. I do small as well. So maybe I'll look into those, because I've heard of it, but it just they're weird to me. Like, what is it?
You can work them thick or you can work them thin, and they're great with palette knife and stuff like that. They're good. But I'll tell you a funny story. When I was in New York, in the New York Studio School, I did a course with
I love studio school.
And this was in 2009 or 2010. And I didn't want to leave New York. I didn't want to come home to my family again. It was run by artists, which was great. But one of the things that fascinated me a lot, the artists wore gloves and masks with the oil paint. And of course, I didn't, and I had my fingers in it, and I was, doing. And one
used to be like,
she wouldn't talk to me. We were out at the sink and I was washing, and she just, I'm talking to you until you put on stuff. So, so I went home and I did a rethink. I did get gloves.
Because of the pandemic, or because of the
they were obviously yellow is a very toxic color.
Because of toxicity, or of the materials?
Toxicity.
When I was in school, I used to like not use anything and be covered in paint, up to my elbows. And then a friend of mine in school had a new kitten, and it scratched him up. and the paint got in the scratches, and he wound up in the hospital paralyzed. It wore off. I mean, he was okay later, but he was temporarily paralyzed. And I was so terrified by that story that after that, I was like, okay, I'm going to use rubber gloves, because if people can perform brain surgery in them, I can learn to paint in them, you know, because I was all very like, I have to feel it and everything. But it was like, after that,
No, your work is amazing. Absolutely. Well done. Thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you. Thanks. What was the name of the residency in Ireland again?
Burren College of Art. BURREN College of Art.
Thank you so much, Carol. That's
And they actually,
fantastic.
yeah, it's really interesting. They have a lot of students come over from Johns Hopkins to do a course in the summer, and they're it's very well run. It's interesting, and there's lots of other places as well, like Kilreely, which they were two of my favorite residencies, and I've learned a lot over the years from them. But it's really interesting to meet you, and you too.
Likewise. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
All right. Salam.